Welcome, everybody, to the second episode of Electro Live. As you know, this show is all about paying homage and recognition to those new and the veteran artists, producers, DJs, songwriters, industry movers and shakers, all of the folks who help, shape the culture of electronic music and hip hop music over the years from its inceptions. Today, we have the great honor of sitting down with Manuel Joseph, otherwise known as the legendary man Parrish. He is an American songwriter, vocalist, super producer. He's definitely one of my heroes. He's certainly a pioneer in hip hop, electronic music. He's mixed, produced, worked with various artists such as Boy George, Michael Jackson, Gloria Gaynor. I think you were a road manager with the Village People. I mean, the list kind of goes on.
Yeah, I mean, it was more than a road manager. They didn't have management, so I was like, everything came through me to get to them. So, hey, do you guys want to play here, there? It came to me and went to there. I started as a road manager, but I wore a lot of different hats. But I just want to let everybody know I gave Scott $100 to say all those good things about me. So checks in the mail, man.
Get out of here.
It's all good.
Hey,
it's all good.
But hey, man, tell everybody how you got started. Like, drugs. Yes.
Well, no, actually, I left home very early. That's a whole other story. But back in the 70s, that's 1970s, not 1870. I'm that old. But I smoked a lot of weed. Actually, I wish I could do it now, but I have that thing where you smoke and you get paranoid, and I wish I could get high, but I can't. Right? So,
man, come on now.
If I'm in so I talked to my doctor and I said, I used to smoke weed when I was a kid, and then one day I couldn't. He goes, "Oh, that's a known." I almost said mental condition.
That's why God made crack, man.
Yeah, no, I know, man. I wish I have a shirt that says "Smoke crack and worship Satan." I wish I could.
There you go.
Man. But if I smoke weed, I get paranoid, and even if I'm in a car with people, lighting up, just from a contact high. He said. It's something in the brain that it's specifically THC that triggers the panic response, and it's now known as a real thing. So when people say, "Oh, I can't smoke because I get paranoid," it's actually a medical condition. I said, "So I'll never be able to smoke again." He goes, "Well, unless you want to flip out." So I'm envious, But back then, I started doing music because I used to smoke a lot of weed. In fact, I didn't even breathe air. That's in the old days when you had a water bong. You know what I mean? Like, right.
The Cheech and Chong thing going on.
But it gets better than that. You would get a nickel bag, which is about an eighth of a bag, a sandwich baggie full. And an ounce was $20 for the crap and $25 or $30 for the good stuff. That's how much an ounce of weed was, okay? So we're going way back. So we spent $20 or $30 get an ounce of weed. And
Lord.
There weren't many electronic synthesizer records out back then, but there was some like experimental stuff. And I thought, how do I do that? Because I used to call it, there was no name for it. I used to call it head music. You smoke, you get a nice head on, and you listen to this trippy stuff. So I started going to there was a library on 53rd Street between 5th and 6th Avenue called the Donnell Library, New York City Library. But they had a huge audio section, and they had all these weird, obscure electronic records. And so did Lincoln Center had an audio thing. And I would go to those two places, cut school, go to those two places and find just the weirdest shit I could find. And I'd sit there and listen to stuff. Sometimes go out, smoke a little, come back in and listen to that stuff. And then somebody said to me, Radio Shack, Tandy Corporation, it has a synthesizer, since you like that kind of stuff. And you could solder it together. It's like $18 or $16. And you sit there, you solder it together, and you can make all kinds of sounds. So that with a 2-track real sound-on-sound tape recorder, I'd smoke up the house, where I was living, turn on my blacklight posters, you know what I mean?
And just start bouncing tracks. Boom, boom.
Well, I was just making beep, right? And then when I'd walk past the hallway, like the neighbors were like, what the fuck? He's like landing spaceships in there or something. I was the weird dude with the smoke and the purple light coming out from underneath the door making weird sounds. So that's how I kind of got started doing music. But this day, I never had any training, and even to this very day, I cannot read or write music or even know what key I'm playing in. I have to put it through a piece of software that says you're in the key of F sharp major or something like that. So I can do dance music, and I've done film scores with a 200-person orchestra and a 100-person choir. I do it all by ear. Right? So that's why I call myself Man Parrish artist on my social media, not Man Parrish musician, because most people are way advanced musically knowledge and theory than I am with their training. But I call myself artist because at least I don't have to have the training. And it's funny, I have a friend of mine who's worked with Hans Zimmer on Batman, and he worked with George Lucas on Star Wars, composing and playing violin and stuff. And he turned around, and he's like a bachelor's or master's from, I don't know, Juilliard, one of those places. And he said, you want to do some music together? And I said, no, like, you'll kick my ass, like, no. He said, I wish I could be like you. He says, you're free. He said, you turn that dial up to 11. And I can only keep it at between 10 and even 8, because that's how I was trained over and over and over again for so many years. You color outside the lines. I can't. And that's why your stuff is way better. I was like, wow.
I agree. Well, it seems like I've heard a lot of stuff from you that was sort of orchestral or ambient, or I
do dance music, but the ambient orchestrally hybrid stuff goes back to the days of smoking weed. And in those days when I did it, I called them soundscapes. It's just ambient music. There's no word for it then. And I used to have all this weird electronic stuff, light up and just kind of close my eyes and trip out, or watch, like I said, the blacklight poster. And that had that little lamp that the bulb would make the outside plastic turn around, and it would put all kinds of kaleidoscope on the wall, like really old school 70s hippie shit. And when I do it today, I'm doing the same thing for my head, minus the chemicals, you know what I mean? So that's why I like my ambient music, because it takes me to that trippy place, without the THC involved,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like a hallucinogenic sort of response. The music and everything that's why the drugs and the music are always sort of combined together, it seems like.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something else, Scott. At my age, and I'm old as fuck, right? Now, at my age, it's not about having a next dance record or pop record or being, the next major artist on the scene. It's more about my legacy, right? So it's more like, what's somebody going to listen to after I'm dead, if they even could figure out, that's that dude that did synthesizer stuff. So I kind of like do what I want now. I don't feel the pressure that I have to be on a dance chart or a pop chart, because I did all that, and there's nothing wrong with it. I'll take it in a heartbeat, but I kind of just do what I want. So like this month, I released 2 dance albums, an ambient album, and 3 singles. I mean, I'm just like, I'm not Prince like on that kind of level, but the way he used to put stuff out every day, every 2 days, I'm possessed, and I'm constantly doing music. I have about 150 tracks on iTunes, and I had to go into ASCAP today to look something, and I have like 226 individual tracks registered there. I was like, damn, and I ain't done yet. Yeah, so
you got the bug, man. You've got the bug to just write stuff and put stuff together.
Yeah, so that's how I do write music, and how I got involved in it, and I got up today at 4:00 in the morning, and I started hearing shit in my head, and I went, I should go back to sleep. All right, let me get to the studio. And,
I can relate to you 100%. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Like I put stuff together too. Like I've got my own little studio stuff, and I've been doing it since I was a little kid. In fact, people like yourself, like Arthur Baker, you, John Robie, all these synth guys, all the way back to Kraftwerk, stuff like that. They inspired me and made me get into buying all these records. I used to eat them up like candy, and got into DJing. They wanted to create the stuff myself. Started hearing my own little grooves and my own little sound, and I always loved to emulate that same sound. That 808 drum sound, the real staccato sort of synthy stuff.
No, I tell you. I mean, I started because I started doing ambient music, but when the 808 drum machine came out and I heard Kraftwerk, I went, wait a minute. I don't have to join a band, because back then you had to be in a band, and I don't know enough about music. So if they say take it from the fourth bar and transpose it to the key of D, I'd be in trouble, right? But when the 808 came out and I heard Kraftwerk, I went, wait a minute, that's my drummer. I can play the bass part. I can play the keyboards. I can't sing, but I have a vocoder. Let's do this. And that's what's inspired me, And I've been doing it for 45 years. I actually just celebrated 45 years in the business. So, or is it 50? Whoa. I can't even remember. Is it no 50 years? Yeah, because I started at 13 and I'm 63. You know what I mean? So, I'm old as fuck, man. That's why they call you legend. No, they call you legend instead of calling you old dude. That's a nice way of saying, you know what I mean? Put the diaper on him and put him to sleep.
He's a legend.
He's a legend. Yeah, get the diaper,
legendary
put him
diapers.
to sleep. And put his food through the give him baby food in the spoon. Yeah. They could go to sleep.
I think the first I was about 12 years old at the time when I heard Planet Rock. That was like the thing that set me off, right? Like,
yeah.
And I just heard their record, and I lived in a kind of an urban-y sort of area. I was like the only white kid in school, and so I was really influenced by the cultures at the time, and so I was into the breakdancing, into the the whole thing. And Planet Rock was the one, but I don't know. I was looking at the dating on that, like so close, like with the Hip Hop Bebop, which I heard like right after
Hip Hop Bebop was recorded in 1982 in my home studio, and then I did a porn soundtrack, got a record deal, and they put that out and said, "Do you have any more stuff?" So I'm going to send Raul, this DJ, over, and we're just going to listen to a couple of stuff. He's going to listen to stuff that you have at your house. And I played him something, that. And he said, that. And I said, that's like an experimental piece of music with beats, which is sort of like those soundscapes I was ambient music, but with a groove to it. He goes, come on, let's work on it. And I said, okay, let's put it aside, but let's do this stuff. And it had dog barking on it. We used to go to the Fun House. The Fun House was a club in New York City, huge, like 6,000 square foot, maybe 10,000 square foot commercial space. They had amazing sound system by this guy, Richard Long, and he had 30-inch subwoofers. You could walk into the cabinets. They were massive. So when they dropped that 808 thing, the building shook, right? So when I forgot, we did some other thing, and we dropped it off at Jellybean in the DJ booth, which was huge, and Arthur Baker would hang out, and Jellybean, and Bambaataa and all that. And he would play a record, and he had a girlfriend with black hair and hairy armpits. We used to call her the Skank. And when you turned around, her T-shirt said, "I'm Madonna." So it was Madonna before she became famous, right? So he put on one of the records. He put on a record, and all of a sudden we heard, ooh, 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 ooh. And I said, what the fuck is that? He goes, when people like music, they bark at it, which Arsenio Hall later did. He didn't start it because people think he didn't start it at the Arsenio Hall, the late night, show, whatever. So I said, Raul, that soundtrack that's like all over the place? Why don't we put that on the record just so we could goof on them? We were going to bark at them and, like shock them, like a record with barking. And we didn't realize, oh my God, what I mean? What happened? Yeah. Well, that record was also promoted a very shady way. Because the guy from the record company used to send out little bags of Coke and MDMA. He would pack it inside, and you would open up and it'd be a letter like, promote our record, please, and a bag of Coke would fall out. And sure enough,
What happened to those days?
yeah, exactly. And I was like, "What are you doing? You're crazy. What are you fucking?" He goes, "No, man. I know what I'm doing. You trust me. I know what." And then he'd push it up on the bill. He'd send it to Billboard reporters, and they would push it up on the Billboard charts. Then he'd call up a radio station and say, "Are you guys crazy? Can't you see what's going on? This is number one, on the Billboard charts and dance charts, crossing over to the pop charts. You got to get on this record." And then once we got stations like KTU in New York on it, then he'd call up BLS and Kiss FM, and then from New York they'd call Boston, and you had New York and Boston, then he'd call New York, Boston, and Baltimore, and it'd be New York, Boston, Baltimore, and then he'd call the West Coast and say, "You guys are like out of it. This record's blowing up on the East Coast, so let me send you a record and a little care." Used to call them care package. Let me send you a record with a care package. It's true. I mean,
that is hilarious, man.
And that's how
what
my
happened to those
album,
days?
Yeah, that's how my first album made it and became big because of that. You know what I mean? Crazy stories. All those records recorded in a single studio in New York called Vanguard Studios. It's on 23rd Street off of 7th Avenue. It's now the Gotham Comedy Club, where they do a lot of TV shows out of and stuff like that. But that was a massive studio. Vanguard Records was a jazz and classical label, but everything was dance, and they couldn't rent the studio out, so they'd give it us 8 o'clock at night for $25 till 8 in the morning, and we'd go in and make records for $25 or $50, starting at 8 o'clock at night. We didn't even know what songs we were writing. Like Two Sisters, High Noon. Two Sisters is me and Raul. Some guy joked that we hang around so much we were like two sisters. I said, "Oh, name for a band. Let's get in the studio and see what we come up." So we would do songs. I would start laying down beats and bass lines between 8 and midnight, and Raul would come up with some lyrics, or I would have with me and him, or whatever it was, and then record from midnight to 3 or 4, and then mix it from 4 to 6 or 7 and 8 o'clock. Pay a $25, $50, and then walk out, and we'd have a finished record. So the radio station in New York, KTU, I was the first person ever in the world since I had a vocoder, to do radio spots for KTU. So my vocoder was 92 KTU, or a DJ Carlos De Jesus classics, dance mix. So they had a unique sound, and in exchange, they would play anything that I would give them in heavy rotation, without me, without, as long as it didn't have any foul language on it, they would put it into heavy rotation, and they would use that to push these records across to other stations in New York and then across the country. Right. So I had this, I was kind of lucky with that. But that also became a trend, which is very common today. When you listen on any radio station, Sirius XM or whatever, there'll be a vocoder voice or a synthesizer voice promoting, the station, Kiss FM or, whatever the call letters are. But I started that in New York in 1983,
Well, man, so, everything.
I was lucky in one sense.
That's amazing. Are you still there with me? You kind of dropped off. Yo.
There you go. I
can
pick it up. I was lucky in one sense because I could. I had that, but I was unlucky in the other sense because I never got paid for any of the records that I did, other than, here's $100, and I was homeless and starving at some points in my career. So I need to eat. I'll do a record for $100. Never signed the rights. Never signed. It's okay to use my music, that kind of stuff. And record labels would put them out. And I was a group called Rama, R-A-M-A, which is Roland Manny. Watch the Closing Doors, IRT, Rama, Don't Want You to Be, Two Sisters, High Noon, B-Boys Beware. God, I got to think. There are so many things back in there. And Alicia Baby Talk. I didn't write it, but I produced it with my friend Michael Wadetsky in my house in Brooklyn. Then we brought the tapes into studio, and I was on so much stuff, either for free. Could you help me out? I remember I remember going into the studio, sitting in what they used to call the green room, which is outside the studio, but there's a window looking. Bambaataa would be lying on the couch, with his Dr. Pepper diet. It wasn't even diet; it was a regular Dr. Pepper. Come on, Bab, get up and get in the studio. All right, party people, get party people, and then go back in, and then he would leave, and we would get in, and then behind us was Freeze with AEIOU.
Yeah, IOU.
You know what I mean? And John Robie would be like, "Can I borrow your synthesizer? I need blah 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 for this track." I'm like, "All right, hurry up! I want to go home." All right, he'd lay down, you know, and then I'd pack up my synth. Come on, John, I gotta get out of here. You know, and then we'd pack up and leave. You know, or just
what
hang out.
synth was it? What synth were you guys using?
So, well, my first album was 3 basic synthesizers. It was a Prophet 5 because you could play 5 notes. It was a Pro 1 because it had a trigger in the back of it, and I could take the output of my drum machine and trigger pulses and play bass line. So if the rim shot went bump, 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 I could then put that pulse into the Pro 1 and do bass lines. Dum da da dum, bump, bump, ba da, dum da da dum, bump, bump, ba da. So this is before computers and sequences, really. And now people think it's amazing, but it's the only way we had to do it back then. When we had like a song, like I have techno tracks, 6 simple synthesizers, and there's a bunch of sequences running in sync. There was no computer doing that. This is before home computers, and there was no way to synchronize a bass. Well, you could synchronize a bass and your drum with that little pulse out of the drum machine. You had to record both at the same time. But what if you wanted to do overdub sequencer like Kraftwerk, those counterpoint sequences? So I became... I wanted to mention back in the day, as people like to say, that was before home computers or big computers. Well, I mean, there were computers, but people didn't have them in their homes yet. Or if they did, they were very, you know, your Apple Watch probably has 10 times more power. So when we did a lot of that music and things like Planet Rock and all that, you wanted tracks to be all in sync. So there weren't any sequencers, or the very beginning of sequences, and there weren't any computer programs like we use today, Logic, GarageBand, Live, Ableton Live if you're on a Mac. So all that stuff had to be done by hand. So if I wanted to lay down a track like 6 simple, or hip hop, bebop, whatever, I could get the bass line and the drums in sync because the drum had an output pulse, and I could feed it to a keyboard and play along, you know, bump, 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 bump. And I would just play the notes in sync with that little pulse while the drums were being recorded, the bass line is being recorded. Now, when you rewind the tape and you want to get how do I make that in sync with the bass line and the drums so it doesn't sound like it's out of sync? There's nothing, there's no system developed yet. So what if you picture 2 flashing lights, and eventually one of those flashing lights is going to go out of sync. So I would then, instead of taking the pulse into the bass of the synthesizer, I would write da 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 da, and then I would play da 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 da, and I'd say rewind the tape to the beginning, and I would on the count in 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I would hit the start of the drum machine on the downbeat where it's supposed to come in. And maybe we would record about 12, 15, 16 bars, and it started to fall out of sync. We'd have to rewind the tape a couple of bars. All right, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, hit record real quick. And then I'd go another 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 bars. And we'd have to do that over 24 tracks. And it didn't always sync up, and we had to roll it back. And, oh, you didn't hit it on time. Let me roll it back again. So it was very labor intensive to get that Kraftwerk synchronized sound. There were a few sequencers that were around back then, but they cost $5,000, like the Roland MC8 microcomposer, and you had to program that in hexadecimal code, right? So that wasn't going to happen. So the reason I got a lot of studio work on these records because I was one of the few guys in New York City that had synthesizers and knew how to sync all these not just 2 tracks of the 24, but 24 tracks if they wanted to, with counter sequencer lines and synth things that were always in sync. So those records were labor intensive, but we were doing records that nobody else was doing because we got that Kraftwerk sequencer synthy kind of sound.
And some of the 808 drum sounds, like some of the bongos and the cowbell, were already synchronized up into the mix.
Drum machine. But if you listen to hip hop bebop, there's those tom-tom sound. That was a Prophet 5 synthesizer that I programmed. That was not a drum machine.
That's what I was wondering. What was that sound? It became very popular.
Yeah, it was a Prophet 5. Because it was sampled later on. Because it was a custom program I wrote on a Prophet 5 synthesizer. I had a Prophet 5. You could play 5 notes at a time. I had a Pro 1, and I had an Oberheim. Oberheim is another synthesizer brand, and they made the OB4 and the OB8 before the keyboards. They were actually little modular. They're white modular 2 oscillator, 1 filter, an LFO, low frequency oscillator. That they kind of sat in the key where the top of the keyboard is. Looked weird. It was like this hybrid kind of machine. But instead of buying all 8, you could buy 1, and it had a trigger impulse, so I could run it off of my drum machine. So all I used was a Pro 1 for the bass line, a Prophet 5 for all the chords, some of the percussion, and my Oberheim for little staccato sequencer lines, because I could sync that with the drum machine and lay it in, 5 or 6 later. So that's that whole album.
Planet Patrol was using those same sounds, even the barking dog, all of that stuff.
Well, I mean, it was either my 808 or John Robie's 808 or my Prophet 5. I had a Juno 2 and a Korg. I can't remember what the Korg was later on. You know what I mean? I didn't buy food. I bought synthesizers. You know what I mean? So, and then I bought one of the very first samplers, 2 seconds on an emulator 1. It weighed as much as like a Hammond organ. It weighed like 60 pounds. It was steel. And it had those big 5.5-inch floppy disks. And you can get 2 seconds on it, not even at full frequency. It sounded like it came out of a telephone. And since I was one of the only people in New York that had it, I used to do a lot of sessions. And then one day somebody called me up and said, Herbie Hancock is going to be on a Good Morning New York or something like that. And there's a video of that on YouTube. And he used my emulator to show how emulators work. And when I got back, the damn thing was broken, and they refused to fix it. So that was the end of that. I went out and I bought a Casio. Yeah. But all that. But
you used that sampler on Boogie Down Bronx. Is that correct?
Use it on Boogie Down Bronx. Use it on Two Sisters High Noon. High Noon. Noon. High. It was used on a lot of records, because it was there in the studio. I'm not sure. John Robie probably used it for AEIOU. I'm not sure what sample he had. He probably used mine in the studio.
Probably did. Yeah, because you were like the first guy with that stuff, man.
I mean, that was like thousands of dollars, you know what I mean, back in those days.
Oh, wow. Did you help produce that COD record, Living in a Bottle?
Yeah, COD. That was a Gil Scott-Heron song. We wanted to do a record. We were getting $500 to $1,000, and I needed to eat. And like, what are we going to do? Well, let's do COD and Gil Scott-Heron and the Bottle. He goes, what should we call the group? I said, COD, cash on delivery. We give you the track. COD, you give me the money. You know what I mean? Right down to there.
That's amazing.
That's what it was. Yeah, Two Sisters, High Noon was, and B-Boys Beware was me and Raul. We hang out with two sisters. You hang out like two sisters, some queens that, girls, you are like two sisters. I said, good. We're going to use that for a name. Go get that girl you were fucking at the office, and Teresa, put her on the cover. You know what I mean? And we did IRT because Raul had to take the IRT down from 96th Street to 23rd Street, the 8th Avenue IRT. So we did IRT, I mean, we would just come up with stupid names because we had to have names for these things that we were doing,
But one of the records, Together Again, you had like saxophone, multiple vocal.
Yeah, well, there's a story behind that because I thought I was listening to British like Erasure and Depeche Mode, kind of British pop stuff because
new wave stuff.
Because in New York, there was only rock and roll, jazz, classical music, and hip hop was still very underground. You would get some of it, but even what was the quote unquote urban stations would play a little bit of it, but would play mostly like R&B disco music, Claudia Barry records, and weird, Barry White, you know what I mean? Because they were urban, but the sound that we were doing was not really developed yet. So I went over to listen to the stuff that used to come over from England, because I was more into like pop music, and since that's what I grew up with. So I wanted Together Again. I thought that was going to be a pop record, right? I get an album, I get a chance at the charts like anybody else. Hell with hip hop, bebop. That's weird. Man-made. Everybody's going to say I copied Kraftwerk. Heat Stroke was a thing from a porn movie. That was a pop song. Yeah, I mean, Together Again. And they said, well, we have to put some other stuff on. I said, well, I wanted this to compete with Human League and with Erasure and all those groups from over there. I said, doesn't your friend play saxophone? Let me call him up and see if he can come in. That's why there was saxophone on that record and not a synthesizer line, because I wanted to be American pop. Synthesizers were dirty words back then, because synthesizers were quote unquote taking jobs away from musicians. Why you're not hiring a string orchestra, you're playing a string patch on a synthesizer. You're not hiring a bass player, you're playing the bass line, so you're the devil. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But it was just the genre that you were exploring, and actually just that raw, just with like the hip hop bebop stuff, the Boogie Down Bronx. The one thing that as a kid, like just listening to music as a kid, most of the kids on the street were loving that kind of sound, that 808 driven.
Because you didn't hear. I mean, there was nothing. There was Arthur Baker
like
making records, and me. And then there was Liggett and Barbosa, which did Shannon, the Shannon Can Be Tonight and stuff like that. There weren't many other people that knew or had an 808 or knew how to synchronize all those things together. So a ton of those records came from me, Arthur Baker, John Robie doing session work. I guess Liggett and Barbosa figured it out, or they hired us to play on their records.
One of the things, I think one of the things too that I kind of keyed in on, and looking back at it, is the way that you mixed your records differently than say like the stuff on Tommy Boy, like say even.
I'll tell you why. Because
bass.
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. First, when I recorded it on an 8-track reel-to-reel half-inch tape recorder. And if people don't know what it is, it was a tape machine that had 8 individual solo tracks. So you can record the drums on 1, the bass on 2, a sequencer line on 3, a guitar on 4, 5, and have a couple of tracks left over for vocals and harmonies. So because in my studio, I realized pretty quickly, take the synthesizer, plug it straight into the tape machine, and make sure it doesn't overload. So the signal path from the synthesizer went straight to tape, not through a mixer, not through a delay line, not through a compressor. So the sound was pretty pure, right?
So fat,
wait. So then at the studio, the engineer was screwing some girl. This was in the basement, on the first floor of an apartment house, and he was cheating on his wife, getting laid from some girl up on the 5th floor. And he go, all right, here's the keys. If you need anything, just call me. You know what I mean? Here's her number. You didn't even have cell phones back then. Ring that rotary phone next to the bed while he's fucking her. You know what I mean? So, how do you plug track 2 into the reverb? And then I learned how to mix. And then I want to hear bass. So I'm a bass freak. So I turned low end up. You can't do that. I'm like, I did. And then we had a guy at Frankfurt Wayne was a mastering house where they took the music and turned it. Well, no, it was a mastering house. It wasn't the plant. The plant got sent off to Europa Desk. When you do a record, they cut a reverse piece of vinyl into acetate. So you're sitting there, giant speakers, they keep the levels even, they decide how much bass and how much treble. If you put too much bass on a record, the grooves get too wide and they'll touch each other, and the needle will jump off of the record. But Herbie Powers, he was a dude, man. He was from the street. I said, "Come on, Herbie, can I'll take a song off to give you more groove space. Put that bass in there. Put that bass in." So I recorded bass. I put it in the mixes, and then he pumped it up. We used to call him Herbie, quote unquote, Pump Powers. You know what I mean? Because he would master bass into it. And in fact, he would inscribe his thing in there. But on some of those records, if you look at the label, the original ones, between the last groove and the label, there was about 1 inch or 2 of space. And we would put all kinds of records in there, like all kinds of things he would scratch in there. Because what do you put in your record? I fucked your mama is on one of them.
Really?
Another one is 12 black inches and a hole. You know what I mean? So we would put all kinds of crazy shit in there. And very few people, but some DJs knew. And when they got the record, they'd take it out of the sleeve and kind of tilt it towards, oh, damn, good day, there's the message on this record and stuff like that.
Yeah, I remember seeing that as a kid because I had all these vinyls, and I'd see like Herbie on Herbie, stuff.
Because he knew how to put bass into a record without making the left groove touch the right groove, so the needle would stay in the record. You could make the when you master a record, you could decide how wide the grooves are in millimeters, and he would crank it up a little bit more, put a little more space to get a little bass. Most guys didn't do that. So when you played it on those 30-inch woofers, your heart stopped.
Yeah. For me, that was everything. Like for me, even today, when I have your CD in my car, like I have a little CD player in my car, and I'll play that CD, and it has better sound.
Listen, I'm coming from the original where you had the very first woofers in the back of a Camaro or dad's dad. We used to call them Cadillacs. You know what I mean? Your dad's Cadillac. And I remember being in Brooklyn, summertime with the windows open, and I was on welfare. I had no money for my records, but coming down the block was boom, 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 boom. I said, "Oh shit, Hip Hop Bebop just passed by me." You know what I mean? Because it was playing on a dope sound system with low end, and you would hear the front hood vibrate. So you get the bass sound plus either the back. The back hood or the front hood would make this metallic, as the bass, it would go doom, brrr, doom, brrr, because it would rattle the hood.
The windows, just rattle that shit, man. They never let that decay out on the 808 back in those days, except for your records. You could definitely hear that thump, that boom, boom. Like with I think it was T-La Rock was maybe the first one to do something close to that. I think. I don't know.
You would most people would told you, like if they had a record deal, you can't do that because you're taking up too much precious space on a side of a record. You only have a certain amount of minutes that you can put on a record, and if you put bass in, you're cutting out time for another song. And they were trying to get as much stuff onto a record as possible. And that's how singles came about, because they wanted to have more high fidelity and lower end. And then they took a whole piece of vinyl and they did it. You could do it at 33, but if you did it at 45, the quality was better. So a lot of 12-inch singles were at 45 because it was better sound quality than 33. And I remember Pop Music, that song, talk about pop music. They had released a record where every other groove, there were 2 songs on one side. There was Pop Music and the B-side, but the B-side was on the A-side. So if you put the needle down, it would play Pop Music. But if you tap the record, a whole other song was like the grooves in between the groove, and it would play a whole completely song to the very end. It was.
Wow.
I remember that. Yeah. So they printed it with super wide grooves, and then the guy, when he went to go print the second song, put the mastering needle, making the negative record, in between the grooves and started going. And there was enough room to put a song in between a song. I may even have that single somewhere. It was a 12-inch single. I remember it. It blew my mind. Yeah. So there you go.
I tell you, man, they were classics. I remember your songs would always appear like on the Scanless Electric Funk series. There's video games. a
Well,
movie,
you
what
know,
was
I
it,
had
Shaun of the Dead or something like that. It's like
so
you're
I sold 5 million. I sold 5 million records, and they bootlegged about 1 million records in downtown Brooklyn. And the FBI and the RIA, Recording Industry Association of America, we didn't even know this was going on. Was chasing these bootleggers and Jamaican dudes, hey, living the good life, right, man? And
mm-hmm,
they confiscated like 1 million records. I sold 5 million records probably to date on that, but
mm-hmm.
there's a whole story about a company in Canada. You know what? I tell people to save time here. Um, I have something called Man Parrish Stories, Stories. I put it up on
Mm-hmm.
YouTube. You took it down because I talked about when I was a kid, I was sexually abused and community standards, and all. I didn't use
Oh.
dirty words, and it's not for children. I clicked off all those things, but some Karen somewhere didn't. Her feelings, were upset that I was talking about. I was a male prostitute when I was starving, you know what I mean? And I was sexually abused as a child. My mother was schizophrenic and tried to tie me to a radiator. All true stories, but they took down 40 fucking videos. I finally
Mm.
got them back up. They're up now. So if you want to hear the stories about hip hop, bebop, and all that kind of stuff, I have 40 videos. I talk about I met Michael Jackson. Freddie
Yeah.
Mercury tried to pick me up at a bar, and I thought, who's this buck-toothed queen imposter trying to be Freddie Mercury, trying to get in my pants? And these are funny stories. I performed in
Mm.
Studio 54. I came down from the ceiling. Madonna was my opening act. The second time I performed in Studio 54, it was for the Return of the Jedi party. George Lucas had asked for me to perform for the New York
Mm.
premiere of Return of the Jedi. I was a male prostitute, wound up with this drug dealer who was dealing counterfeit money, and the FBI came in one day, and I had to testify against the mafia. I'm telling you, dude, crazy stories
They're going to
that
be in
make
the
hip hop be.
links.
But
Check them
yeah,
out, guys. They'll be
oh
in the
yeah,
links.
cool, yeah. You can just send them to the page. But it like I've had this insane, crazy life. I went to the high school performing arts where they filmed the movie Fame.
Uh-huh.
And in the 70s and 80s, there was a show called Chico and the Man with Freddie Prinze. I got thrown out the same day as Freddie Prinze. And I had to work. I needed money because ran away from home. I worked at the Metropolitan Opera House, and I was carrying spears, a non-singing role. I was the crowd or the army marching across stage. And one day we all took acid and wound up, walking through horse shit and tripping our brains out on stage. And there's so many funny, crazy stories, man.
That's your legacy.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's some bad stories because my friend Michael Radetsky was the guy who died in Boy George's apartment, in London, and I've had people literally die in my arms. All these stories
Oh,
are up
wow.
there. So if you want to dig deeper, it's some pretty. It
Man,
sounds
we
like
should-
fiction, but it's all true. Yeah.
It could be a good movie. It's like these are the
Well, that's
best
what
kind
I'm
of
trying to
movies.
do.
Mhm.
Well,
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah, I'm talking to somebody about a Netflix series. I want to have some young kid,
Okay.
you know what I mean? Wake up. Spider-Man lives in Queens, crawls out the window at night and becomes Spider-Man, comes back during the day, and it's just mom and let me go to school. Well, I want to do this kid that gets in on the subway, and every night, Andy Warhol gave me my name. I was Manny Parrish. He said, that's too common. I'm going to name you Man Parrish from the artist Man Ray. I'm like, I don't care. We used to go to Andy Warhol parties, Studio 54. If that designer Halston, we wound up in his house one night after Studio 54. They're passing around giant silver platters with 3 pounds of cocaine on it, 5 pounds of cocaine on it. Sitting next to me to my right side was Andy Warhol, Bianca Jagger, Mick Jagger, Halston, the designer. The other side was Liza Minnelli. These are people of the day, Truman Capote, and I can't remember somebody else. And I'm sitting here with these like major like TV stars, household movie stars, rock and roll stars. And I was just like, yeah, we're just hanging out. You know what I mean? It's like, and then I got on the subway and I went back to Brooklyn. You know what I mean? It's like, it was crazy.
Did you ever want to imagine that? Like, was that ever the goal in your life? Like, did you ever envision that kind of stuff?
I wanted to be an actor. I didn't want to be a musician. I wanted to be an actor. And I thought, well, I got thrown out of performing arts. That's never going to work. I used to go to a place called Max's Kansas City in New York, which is a rock and roll bar. Debbie Harry used to work behind the bar and then get up and sing Blondie. She'd come back. We saw Bruce Springsteen get booed off the stage because he did an acoustic act and people booed him. Aerosmith used to come down from Boston, do a show, and then pull their van up in front of the door, basically, at the edge of the street there. trying to get pussy, trying to get laid. You know what I mean? We saw Talking Heads, Beastie, the Ramones. You know, all these groups that started out on. I mean, all these shit. You know, they were nobodies, and you know, we saw all these groups and stuff. So I don't know.
But you were mainly just into the music for the psychedelic experiment.
Well, you got to remember this is early '70s, so there wasn't any dance clubs. Disco was just starting, and I really wasn't into disco. And if you went to disco, you're like, ooh, you went to a disco, you know.
Disco sucks.
Yeah, disco sucks, exactly. So I didn't go to a jazz bar. I wasn't into classical music, so you went to the rock club because that's all that was around. You know what I mean? CBGBs and Maxes, and there were these quote unquote local bands. You know, the Ramones, a local band. The Cars from Boston are coming down, local band. You know, Devo with David Bowie and Brian Eno introducing them on stage. And later on, I went to David Bowie's house, and my stories. I tell a really funny story where I snooped through his underwear drawer and all that kind of stuff. And then his manager became my manager later on past that. And I went through so much. He just like robbed me blind, like he did to Bowie. But my one Bowie story that's there too is Bowie had an album called Young Americans, and he went from doing hard rock to more of at what he thought at that time was an urban sound. So he did a song called Young Americans, which was pretty cool considering Bowie did hard rock and roll music. And we got to go into the studio. My friend knew him, and I tell the story, but we hung out in the control room with David Bowie, this woman Ava Cherry, beautiful black chick with white hair, and an unknown background singer at that time called Luther Vandross. And Luther did all the backgrounds on Young Americans. And Bowie said, "Do you want to hear my new track? It's kind of cool." We're like, yeah. And he hit play on the tape recorder, unmixed, kind of pushed the faders up a little bit, and it was Young Americans, you know. So we got to hear that months before it came out, which was totally
because he switched his sound up, man, like, you know, and then Let's Dance, the big song came out.
But he got away from his manager, who was also my manager. And I was doing dance music. I was on Electro Records. That's what they hired me for. They gave me $125,000 for a single, and most people got $10,000 for a single. But Bowie's manager is my manager. I'm going to be the next big thing, right? So he took all the money, and he said, "Listen, I don't care what they tell you. Electronic music is dead. It's never going to happen. Hell with the street stuff. I want you to get a guitar, learn how to play it, or I want you to, we'll send you for singing lessons, slide across the stage, lick the guitar, you know, be Kiss or Bowie or whatever." So I turned in this piece of rock and roll music, and the label is like, "What the fuck is this?" I'm like, "Well, you know, I want to be like a maniac for your love." You know what I mean? Like, and they're like, "I hired you for hip hop bebop," and I'm like, "Oh, all right." And so the manager goes back and gets another $25,000 on top of the 20. So I had $150,000. He's keeping all this, buying cigars and flying around the world, and I'm getting $30,000 a month, invoices. You know, we spent $25,000 on a limited. Like, what do you? Oh well, he had to talk to somebody. He had to fly to Switzerland, you know, to go get, you know, his mood ring that would influence the record. Whatever story I got, you know what I mean?
My God!
Yeah, so I do this other song called what was it? It's on YouTube. It's on my channel. I hired a recording truck, put it in my driveway, and it was not Tarzan Boy. Some whacked out, like, you know, sampler. He's crazy. He's crazy. You know, some sort of crazy song. You could actually hear it a little bit. People say, "Why don't you redo it?" And we could put up. And of course, the record company was just like, So my mother died. My record label dropped me. My manager dropped me, and I was performing at Studio 54, coming down from the ceiling, all in the same day. I had come from I went from the cemetery to rehearsal at Studio 54 to come down.
Fuck.
They said, how do you want to enter? And I was in complete shock because I had lost my record label, my manager, and I just put my mother in the ground. And I'm standing there in the empty Studio 54, and they said, "How do you want to enter?" I said, I pointed to the ceiling. I said, "From there." So they said, "Oh, no problem. We'll get you all hooked up and whatever." So They raised me up into the it was a a theater. So I'm like up where the scenery would be above the stage, and they lowered down this tiny little like parakeet perch, I call it. It's a tiny little bar with a wire, chains or ropes on either side. And I had this Darth Vader outfit, which was really slippy. It was really hot. And they said, we're going to raise you up, but be careful up there because there's neon. There's 25,000 volts. And if you break the neon, you'll be electrocuted and you're going to shatter all the glass down on the crowd. And I'm thinking, holy fuck. And these are in the days when they had 1,000-watt light bulbs. They didn't have LEDs. So the higher they lifted me, the hotter it got. And up there, it's probably about 105 degrees. I'm in a corduroy jumpsuit with a Darth Vader cape as thick as, a winter coat. And now I can't see because everything is dripping into my eyes, all the makeup and all the glitter and all the stuff we used to use. And my hands, I can't hold on to these chains anymore because they're soaking wet. I was soaking wet. And I tried to readjust myself, and the swing is swinging back and forth like my nose is practically touching the neon on one side, and then it's swinging back to the other side. I can feel like the heat on this side from the lights. And they said, all right, well, just play one song, and then we're going to lower you down into the audience. I said, great. Those songs are 7 minutes long. I think, okay, the song's ending, great. And I'm up there, and then all of a sudden another song starts, and I'm thinking, no, that's another 7 minutes. I've been up here for 15 minutes. And I said, okay, something went wrong. There's a delay. That song finished, and another song comes on, and I start freaking out. I look down. The people were like ants. I'm about 7, 8, 10 stories up, right? And they forgot that I'm up here, and I'm screaming, help, get me down, help! But this is on top of a mega sound system. You can't hear nothing.
You can't hear shit, yeah.
And I'm thinking, I'm going to either fall into the crowd, dead, or it's going to be 4 o'clock in the morning. They turn the lights on, and then they'll hear me screaming, you know what I mean, from like noon. So finally, I get to lower down onto the stage. The guy that was doing the dry ice on the stage was only supposed to put about a foot of dry ice on the stage, and we had this creature, and we had these costumes, and people and all that kind of stuff. And I'm supposed to jump off a couple of feet into the smoke. And I thought, it's Studio 54. Instead of jumping off at 3 feet, let me jump off at 4 or 5 feet or 6 feet, because this cape will come out like an umbrella, and it's going to look beautiful. Well, the guy was drunk, and he put about 10 or 12 feet of smoke on the stage. So the floor was about 12 a story and a half where it should have been. And I'm miscalculating, and I probably did a 2-story drop, and I dropped like into this giant cloud of smoke, and the audience went crazy, like, oh my God, he just jumped into this like pool of thing, and I can't see. We can't find the edge of the stage. I'm screaming, what the fuck is going on? The song's on, and I didn't put the mic next to me because I'm like, where? Oh, are you there? Where? I'm here. All right, quiet. Let's just start singing. And we're trying to do our show, which has, movements, and you have to be here at a certain time, there at a certain time. Total blindness, and the smoke is wearing down, going low, and the audience is like, oh my God, you're incredible. And I start feeling my ankle, and I went, oh my God, I broke my ankle, because I felt I didn't break it. I severely twisted it, but I finished the show after that. But
man.
And then Madonna went on at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. That's when the opening act went on. She jumped off the balcony onto like this blow up birthday cake, and like almost like a kid bouncy castle kind of thing. And
is that the real popular thing that I see? Like I see the advertisement with Madonna, Parrish. It's kind of
it depends.
Is that
which
the
one
same
it is.
show?
Well, it depends. I played at Studio 54, and I was the headline act for Fiorucci. Michael Jackson was in the audience. I'll tell you quickly about that. But there was Henry Kissinger, who was the Secretary of State under, was it Carter? I don't know who was president then, but he was. So he starts after the show, or before, he starts dancing with like this famous New York City drag queen, and she's trying to make out with him. And somebody said, Henry Kissinger, this photographer, say he's like fucking dancing with a transvestite, and he's got to be at the UN tomorrow. Get her out of there. So, sweetheart, they grabbed Brooke Shields and they had Brooke Shields dance with Henry Kissinger. And if you Google it, you'll see there's a picture of Henry Kissinger, Brooke Shields dancing at Studio 54. That happened on my night. So after the show, I go upstairs, hanging out in the dressing room, and this big bodyguard comes up and said, "Mr. Jackson would like to speak to you." And I didn't know who. I said, "Oh, Mr. Jackson must be one of the owners of Studio 54. He must probably heard me yelling up there, and boy, am I in trouble." And he's walking me down. I'm like, "Oh, we're going to go through the crowd and then up through a secret door, mafia door on the side, because they had coke going on in that place. They would stuff the money under the rafters and the coke under the rafters at Studio 54 in the basement, you know what I mean? And you go down to the basement. It was a private VIP room. They just reach up in the ceiling, pull down like a half a pound of coke, a kilo of coke, and just give it to everybody for the night. It was crazy. It was really crazy. And then all of a sudden, we go over to the side, and I'm like, "Oh shit, that's Michael Jackson!" And they use a little VIP here. And I was like, "Oh, Jackson, Michael Jackson, all right." And he goes, "Well, pleased to meet you." And I said, "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Jackson." No, call me Michael, call me. I said, "Okay, Michael, pleased to meet you. I really like your music and your show." I said, "Well, I really like you." And he goes, "Oh, that's okay, thank you. He said, "I'd like you to, would you like to do a remix on my album, Speed Demon?" I think it was on Bad Album. And I said, "Oh, yeah, I really," he goes, I want that sound, that street sound. And I said, yeah, definitely. He goes, "Okay, someone will be in touch with you." And like the security guard just basically turned me around and said, "Get out." You know what I mean? So I wound up doing a hip hop bebop version of Speed Demon. We got a call a week later from Quincy Jones. Q West was his company out in LA. And we got a call from Q West and Quincy Jones. He sent over the master tape for Speed Demon, which is Michael's vocals and all that. And we did, Speed Demon, Speed Demon, and we mixed it and we sent it back. And Quincy's like, "Oh my God, I love this." And Michael hated it and it never came out. And it's sitting somewhere. It's sitting somewhere at Sony Records in Evolve. Yeah.
Wow, I would have loved to have heard that.
I would love to hear it because I don't even remember what it's like.
Right. That would have been a classic, man.
That would have been crazy. Yeah.
What would there be not to like about that? Like, I know it was a dope.
Well,
track.
I think it was so. After Prince died, somebody contacted me and said, "Prince listened to your music." I was like, "Yeah. Oh, thank you. Like you're some psycho dude." He goes, "No. I'm serious. I'm like, "Okay, thank you." And I literally said to him in Facebook and message, "Are you sure you worked for Prince?" And then he showed me pictures from Paisley Park where he was one of the engineers and he's sitting there with Prince and he goes, "Prince would sit and listen to other people's music and follow music trends." And he goes, "He loved your track." And he said, had he known that you were ripped off and all that, he would have paid for lawyers to, go after your royalties and all that. And he had done that for other people under the agreement that he did it anonymously. I mean, the artist knew it was, but the artists were not allowed to tell people. So a lot of those people, Prince, Michael Jackson, they couldn't go to the fun house and bark in the crowd with everybody else. So they were very, very, very interested because they knew music had turned from disco to R&B to hip hop, and they had their ear to the ground and wanted to do the next best thing. So he was Jackson and Prince, they were very aware that music was changing from stuff that they didn't do to 808 music and synthesizers. So, I was at the top of the, at the garbage heap at that point, and that's why he wanted to do it. But I think what I did was too, it was like, they call them deeper cuts. It was like really like, I've already done it for like a year or two. It wasn't pop and fluff. It was a little bit more dub, which wasn't even happening then. Yeah, dark. And I think he couldn't handle it because he wouldn't be able to put it on pop radio and it wouldn't be a number one.
That makes sense.
You got to remember, they'd have to sell. Michael Jackson sold to black kids, but he mostly sold to a wide audience around the world. And they were not exposed to that kind of music yet.
They were not.
So, right. So if you had, like a song like, who's the one, there's a Lionel Richie. Somebody uses an 808 drum machine, but it's standard.
Oh yeah,
music
like
and he
Marvin Gaye or
sings
something. Yeah,
like yeah. If it was
Sexual
like
Healing.
just Sexual Healing. If it was something like that, he probably would have did it. But we had hardcore,
Yeah.
hey ho, and
It would bass in there, boom. Yeah.
Yeah, that he liked it, but he didn't think, and he was probably right that America would be like,
We weren't ready for it.
Put out a piece of junk. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean the whole scene, like from what you're telling me, like even when you did the whole show, even those records, it was a drama, and it was like now these records people make are like dime a dozen. Like it's just these DJs.
A lot of people. Well, I mean, it's funny. I didn't DJ until 20 years ago, and I stopped 5 years ago, 15. I had the longest running underground party in New York, and I hired 1 or 2 DJs, and after the 3rd week, I'm like, this is fucking ridiculous. I'm going to learn how to DJ, and I DJ'd like a 7-year-old. Just one record would stop, and the next one would start. You know what I mean? And then I'd go home and learn how to, blend, and I'd spend all week, and then I just started DJing stuff. But but DJs come from a different thing because they don't have musical background, and then you grab a loop, you grab a beat, you grab a bass thing,
copy paste everything,
copy and paste. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not being a snob and saying I don't do that. But I built my stuff up from scratch. I programmed the bass sound. I didn't get a sample of it or hit a preset. All my stuff. I came from analog synthesizers with patch cords that looked like a switchboard in the 70s. So I had to learn how to make string sounds and bass sounds. I went to like an extra night class at New School for Social Research, and it was the only place in New York City that had synthesizer sounds. I learned on this rare synthesizer called an ARP 2600. It was about 6 feet long and 3 feet high, and had tiny little push pins that you would get sounds out of. So, I'd learned from the ground up. So I had to program instead of pressing a button. Now I press a button. No, I still program. I'm kidding.
I personally I mess with the computer stuff, but I love the I went and bought a bunch of hardware and shit, like.
Well, I know. So, all right, so let's talk about that, because I get a lot of people, I do interviews, they're like, oh man, you're so lucky you grew up with hardware. You know what I mean? I mean, now you just press a button. Well, let me tell you something. It wasn't that good, and I'll tell you why. Before computers and solid state electronics, a lot of stuff run on transistors and tubes. So I would program a bass sound, but it'd be 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, let me go to sleep and come back, and I'll wake up in the morning and I get the bass sound, leave the synthesizer on, and I'll just come back when let me go lay down for a little while, wake up, and that bass sound was suddenly like a flute sound because those oscillators would drift, they amplify all the stuff. You had to print it, and once you printed it, you would never, even though those knobs were in the same. You could put a little grease pencil. This one's at 6. This one's at 4. This knob is at 9. It would never sound the same because depending on whether the circuits and the synthesizer was just turned on or was physically warm, the circuits would stretch. The oscillators would change, and you would never get that sound again. Now, when you get a great sound, you can capture it and you can save it. And I had a situation. I got one of those I mentioned before, MC8 microcomposers, and programmed. I wanted to do like a Don Summer I Feel Love. So I had to put in, for every beat, 12 voltages, 12 gates, and 12 triggers. Most people, that's going to sound like crazy, but I had to put 12, 20. I had to put in 36 entries to get a beat of 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm doing a 5-minute piece of music. So you're sitting there with a calculator and a little chart. Was C, a hexadecimal F1 or F3? Oh, let me look up C. All right, C, and then put all the stuff in. So that didn't have any kind of backup. And again, one of those things I said, I just spent 9 hours programming this, but I sound like Kraftwerk with Giorgio Moroder. This is so dope. I'm going to record it when I get up in the morning. Got up in the morning, opened the door. The dog ran through my studio, tripped over the wire, pulled the plug out, and all that stuff was gone.
Just gone. Oh, man.
You want to talk about how wonderful it is with hardware?
Oh, Lord.
That. If I need a synthesizer, well, companies like Arturia and Native Instruments, those things are accurate to the bit to the waveform of the synthesizers that they're modeling. So it sounds the same. Everybody thinks that it's the synthesizer that's going to get them the sound. It's not the synthesizer that gets the sound that I did. It's the circuitry used to record it. So if you can get a Tascam tape recorder, which has distortion, and a Tascam mixer, you would have a hip-hop bebop sound, not the Prophet 5 or the Pro 1. People don't understand that. So it's the signal path that the sound traveled through. Everybody had the same synthesizer back then because there weren't that many synthesizers.
So it's almost like the magic of the moment when you plugged everything up.
No, it's the magic of the circuitry. I had a Tascam.
That's what I'm saying. It's like
when somebody else had a TIAC, or had a Fostex machine. Well, Fostex machine with a Prophet 5 synthesizer has a completely different sound than a Tascam machine with a Prophet 5 synthesizer. So it was the recording gear and the recording circuits that made the sound. The synthesizer made a bass sound, and it did have an effect on it. But people say, "What synthesizer did you use?" I'm like, "It was a Prophet 5 and a Pro 1," but it was the circuitry that made it sound. That now they emulate tape recorders and distortion and things from back in the day. You can get close to it, but if you really want it, you need to buy an 8-track half-inch machine and and the board to get that sound to sound exactly like that.
Sound was just an emergent property of all those different things, not just one thing.
It was the signal path after the synthesizer and before until it was mixed. So it was the equipment in the chain, in the audio chain, from the output of the synthesizer until you heard it, until it was mixed onto tape. All that equipment in between is what made the sound, not the synthesizer.
Wow. That's interesting stuff, man. That because people talk about that all the time. Like, you got to get the gear because that's how you get to capture that retro sound. No.
I mean, other people had Prophet 1 and Prophet 5s, and they sound different. Some of them sound really thin and shitty because they were going through Fostex equipment or MCI equipment. It's stuff that's not around now. But, the equipment didn't have the balls the equipment that I had. And I didn't go out and buy that equipment because it had balls. I just wound up with that equipment, and it happened to have balls, so I lucked out. You know what I mean?
You started a whole trend, dude, just haphazardly.
I didn't go in there. I didn't say, give me the best tape recorder with the deepest bass and compression on it. No, I just bought what I could afford, and I couldn't afford all the extra gear, so my stuff got pretty much plugged directly into the machine because I didn't have a 24-channel mixing board, and I didn't have compressors and all that reverb. So I just recorded. I said, well, let me just get... I would unplug a cable from track 1 and then plug it into track 2 and change the synthesizer sound. I mean, that was it, from the back of the synthesizer into the machine. And you didn't record in stereo because you didn't have... A lot of those synthesizers weren't in stereo yet, or you didn't want to take up 2 tracks because you needed the other track for a vocal or a drum or something like that.
You were working with your limitation, man. That's amazing.
And that's another thing. But that's also another thing because you couldn't overproduce. You were forced to think, what can I get done in 8 tracks? Well, you need a lead vocal on track 1, background vocal on track 2, and if they want to do a track harmony 3, then you have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You're left with 5 tracks. So one is drums, one is bass, right? Now you're left with 3 more tracks. What are you going to do? A background sequence, a line, a pad, and maybe a special effect or a dog bark. Bang, there's your record.
And there it is. Wow.
Yep.
Man, I'm going to respect your time. This has been really, really interesting, especially this last segment as well about the gear. I know a lot of people that are going to really dig this information, man. That's Parrish Stories on YouTube, STORIES. Man, it'll be in the links too.
By the time this gets out, that'll be there. My social media is Man Parrish Artist on Facebook and on Instagram. On Facebook, I'm full up 5,000, the maximum, but you can follow me. And what I do is I put up stupid memes every day to keep everybody happy and entertained. And in between that, I'll put up record releases. I do dance music, I do remixes, I do ambient music and film score. If you like getting high, check out some of my ambient stuff. It's very deep. Put on some headphones. Smoke the hell up and put on some headphones and fall asleep. That's another.
It would be
thing,
it would be a dream for me if ever I could make a track and you remix that bad boy. That would be for me.
Hey, listen, it's a good track. I'll definitely do it. Listen, I mixed today because everybody listens off of earbuds and headphones. So if you want to hear the good stuff, plug in some headphones and earbuds because I do a lot of spatial stuff. You know,
spatial,
it's close to the thing. Is it on the left or right? Is it far away? Is it fly over your head? So you listen to my stuff, do it on headphones. It was great talking to you, man.
We'll do it. Thanks so much for doing this with me, brother. Appreciate it, guys. We'll see you next time. We'll have somebody else be just as good, hopefully. Not sure how we'll top this one.
They won't. They won't.
This is
I'm gonna give myself like some milk and cookies now because I did good.
Oh hell yeah. Yeah. All right, man. We will talk to you later on, brother.
Thank you so much. It was great.